Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Omar Khalid. But today is the 18th of November 2024 and these are the stories that we will be highlighting in the course of the show. We'll begin with the Middle East situation. Of course, today is day 407 of this conflict between Israel and Palestine. But the fact is that the brutalities continue. The lack of basic facilities, whether they be relegated to health or food and water, still continue. And of course, things are now escalating because Lebanon is also under fire. The number of casualties is also increasing. So are the displacements, so are the issues. There is some kind of a ray of a hope regarding a ceasefire situation between Israel and Lebanon. But for the moment, nothing concrete has happened, although a lot of things are pointing in that direction. But nothing is pointing in any direction when it comes to Palestine. In fact, what is also being pointed towards is the annexation of the occupied West Bank. Will that eventually happen is what we will discuss in our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns Pakistan's economy and a recent statement by our Minister for Finance, Mr. Aurangzeb, who says that paying fair share of tax is now compulsory and asserts use of force for tax recovery. He also talks of different kinds of taxes like agriculture tax and its imposition as well. Things in the right direction. How quickly will that be implementable is what we will be discussing in our second story. Then we are going to talk about Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, who have agreed to have no control, no AI control over nuclear weapons. Xi Jinping has also said that China is ready to work with Donald Trump administration for a smooth transition in bilateral ties. Finally, we will be talking about the situation as far as the smog is concerned. Of course, Pakistan is engulfed in it as well, so is Lahore and the cities, but the situation is getting better in Pakistan. But when it comes to New Delhi, the situation remains as dire as possible. The visibility in New Delhi has dropped to 100 meters in New Delhi, and it is said that the New Delhi pollution reading is the highest ever this year. We'll be ending our show with this very situation. Let's begin today's show and let's begin with a talk on the Middle East situation, day 407 of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And of course, it's not just relegated now to Palestine, but also to Lebanon, to Syria and to Yemen. We've been joined by Nader Alturk, Chargé d'Affaires of the Palestine Embassy. Brother Nader, thank you very much to have joined us. Pleasure to have you in our show. Brother, I'd like to begin a little outside of Gaza and talk a little bit about Palestine. We are seeing a replication of whatever is happening in Palestine in Lebanon as well. Again, the paramedics are being bombarded. Again, the places are being bombarded. Again, the casualties are increasing. Again, the people are being displaced from one place, one way to the other. The UNHCR says around 472,000 people have been displaced since this conflict began. Is Lebanon, in your point of view, Brother Nader, becoming another Gaza?
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to be here tonight. Actually, Lebanon, I think all the world will become Kubi-based suffering like Gaza as long as the international community failed to punish the Israelis and stop genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Because if the Israelis feel that they have the power to do all these crimes without getting punished, without getting anyone asking what you are doing, you are not having the right to do such thing like this, you need to stop, then they will have the courage to copy and paste these crimes everywhere they can. You see what the Israelis football team supporters do in Amsterdam when they attack other civilians in the street of Amsterdam. You see what happened in France, and I think all this aggressive, all these crimes going to be transferred by the Israelis everywhere they can in the world. So this is opportunity once to need to be taken. If we lose it, all the humanity going to be suffer. It's need to make the Israelis pay the price for their crimes. All these crimes going to be done by the Israelis everywhere in the world. And we need to keep in mind one thing. The Israelis themselves believe that all the human beings are just animals, are slaves. Allah creates them to serve them, to make their life easier. So if they are not looking only for Palestinians as a human animals, but they're looking for all the humanity, if they are not part of them as a human animals. So the humanity need to take action, united together, to stop the Israelis' crimes against the humanity, against the Palestinians, and the double standards, and make all the international laws, all the international resolutions to be obeyed by the Israelis, and everyone, all will be suffered.
Nader, also, if you come to Palestine, the number of casualties has risen far beyond 43,000. The number of injured has increased far beyond 103,000. The fact is that this is not the real estimate. The actual estimate, the actual numbers are much, much more, as far as also the Lancet report that talks about 180,000 people plus who have been killed since this conflict began on the 7th of October last year. To add to that is the misery of the people, whether they are in areas like Beit Lahia or Jabalia. They are also being bombarded there, but they are refugees in those. These are camps that these people are present in, and these camps are also being bombarded. Hospitals, education institutions are being bombarded, and there is almost no health facility available for the Palestinians in Palestine so that they could be taken care of. The water, food scarcity is present. The United Nations has time and again talked about a situation of famine as far as Palestine is concerned. I understand the situation, at least if I understand well, is the worst that this century has seen. But what can be done to prevent it from being the worst of the last few centuries?
First of all, we need to understand that the Israelis' plan from day one until now is to displace Palestinians not from north of Gaza to middle of Gaza or south of Gaza. The Israelis' plan is to displace Palestinians out of Gaza, and if they succeed with that, they will do the same for the Palestinians who live in West Bank and East Jerusalem, because they want the land of Palestine, land without people, for the Israelis to occupy it, settle there, make more settlements, bring more Zionists from outside of around the world to replace the Palestinians in their homeland, which we own it and live there since 1,000 years, even more. So this is the Israelis' plan. So they are making people in Gaza starving to death, especially in north of Gaza. This is not new. Actually, since 20 years, Gaza people suffering of the Israelis closure. Israelis was account the calories which is the people in Gaza needed to allow how much food they can allow to pass to Gaza. This policies since 20 years until now, right now become more aggressive, more criminal by making people starving to death. Not only give them enough calories, right now they didn't give them none to be died to death by starving without getting water or food.
But then in all of this, situation, there was a lot of hope that came in the past as well, that there might be some kind of a truce or a peace deal between Israel and Palestine. There were talks about it for the last month of Ramadan, nothing happened. Then there were other ceasefire talks that were talked about, nothing happened. There were United Nations resolutions that talked about ceasefire, nothing happened, nothing was implemented. Then there was the three-phase deal by Joe Biden that was talked about, never implemented. Then a two-day peace deal that was pushed by the Egyptians, nothing happened. When it comes to Lebanon, there's another hope as far as some kind of a peace deal is concerned. Apparently, the US envoy, Mr. Hochstein, is going to travel to Beirut tomorrow to talk about this ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. Can there be some hope as far as Lebanon is concerned for ceasefire, or will we see a repetition of all the times that we saw some hope or some glimmer of hope as far as a ceasefire in Palestine is concerned?
First of all, brother, as a Palestinian, we suffer for long time. During the British occupation to Palestine since 1918 to 1948, after that from the Israelis occupation since 1948 until now. So we are know what the price we are paid. According to that, we don't like any other people, no other nations, no other brothers in humanity to suffer like us, because we know what kind of suffer we are facing with the Israelis. So we wish our Lebanese brothers succeed to be survivor from these crimes against the humanity, which is done against them by the Israelis. But again, the Israelis will do this to Lebanon, do this because they want to punish the Lebanese brothers because they stand up with the Palestinians against the Israeli crimes in Gaza and in the whole of Palestine. So they want to make them to learn a lesson, make them example for anyone to stand up and support the Palestinians, because they want the Palestinians to be alone in their struggle for peace, freedom, and independence. So this is what the Israelis do, first. Second, they want to make not only the example for all the world, they want to give a message for all the world that we have the power to do what we can do, any kind of crimes, any kind of ethnic cleansing, any kind of genocide, and no one has the power to punish us because the American government always here to support us with whippings, with diplomacy, with media. And if you see what Mr. Blinken said before, that Israel is actually not making genocide. Israel is facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid to Gaza. According to that, after the 30 days end, we found the fact that the Israelis are following the international law. According to that, we will continue support the Israelis with whipping, which means they are giving green light for the Israelis to continue their crimes against the Palestinians, against Lebanese, and against anyone they have the power to kill him in cold blood.
About Anthony Blinken, it's interesting because he's also recently said that Israel has accomplished its goals, quote unquote, and that it was time for fighting in Gaza to end. At the same time, the incoming Republican leader of the US Senate has threatened to use its majority to sanction the ICC if it continues to pursue Israeli officials. Then the Council for American Islamic Relations has also urged Joe Biden to heed Pope Francis's call for an inquiry into the allegations of genocide against Israel. Do you feel that anything will happen on that front? Do you feel there will be some investigation by the US as far as the genocide is concerned? Secondly, the way the threats are being made on the ICC, if anything happens against Israel, do you think A, this is justified, and B, even if it is not justified, do you feel this will go as planned and the ICC and ICJ decisions will have no say whatsoever for whatever Israel is doing or will do in the future? And thirdly, when Anthony Blinken says that Israel has accomplished its goals, why isn't it stopping Israel from continuing what it is doing?
First, for Mr. Blinken and Mr. Biden, maybe the only difference between them and Mr. Trump, that Mr. Trump is clear, don't have double faces like them. Actually, for Mr. Biden and Mr. Blinken, they are just liars, cheaters, give you double standards, double face, told you something, and the other places speak something else. And they are having two policies over the table and policies under the table. And according to that, if you see the Americans during Biden he is a president, they use the veto 4 times against ceasefire in Gaza. On the other hand, always they speak about ceasefire and stop targeting the civilians and follow the international law when they actually support the Israelis, on the other hand, by whippings to kill more civilians, support the Israelis by diplomacy to cover their crimes, support the Israelis by media to make them look nice for all the world and for all the humanity, to make brainwash for all the human beings, to accept the Israelis, the Zionists as a humans, good humans, act according to law and act as a human. So Mr. Biden and Mr. Blinken actually just liars, speak about something and do something else. This is first. Second, for ICG and ICC, they make a lot of decisions, and it is not the only decisions actually. We have more than 800 decisions by resolution by United Nations in favor of Palestine. The Israelis obey none because they are sure the Americans going to use the veto always to protect them. They will use their diplomacy and their power to support them and make them run away with their crimes. So if this keep happening more and more, all the world, all the humanity will stop trust the international organization, will stop respect and obey the international courts, and they will stop trust and believe in international resolution. They're going only trust and obey the power. And if we start obey only the power, that means everyone has the power. He will use it in moody way, according to his interest, without respect or obey any rules or any resolution or any international law, which means we're going like a wild animals, kill and kill each other, going from this circle of blood to other circle of blood, as long as we have the power to do what we can do without pay the price for our crimes.
All right, but then other also I'd like to understand Mike Huckabee, who is going to be the next ambassador of the US to Israel, talks about annexation of the occupied West Bank. This is something that is reiterated by Smotrich as well, and you know who exactly Smotrich is, the finance minister of Israel. And then you add to it the what is happening in the occupied West Bank, the displacements of people, the arrests of people, the killing of people in the occupied West Bank. What is the game plan as far as Israel is concerned and the occupied West Bank is concerned? Do they actually want to do that, annex the occupied West Bank and make it part of their own?
This takes us for my speech since 1 year, brother. Takes us back. The Israelis plan displace people of Gaza outside of Gaza. If they succeed with that, they will make the same displace the people of West Bank outside of West Bank. Then, if they are succeed with that, they're working hard to get a greater Israel, which include 100% of the historical land of Palestine, 100% of Jordan, 100% of Lebanon, 100% of Kuwait, 75% of Syria, 45% of Iraq, 35% of Egypt, 35% of Saudi Arabia, part of south of Turkey. This is the Israelis' plan, and this is the Israelis' dream, which having a greater Israel. We hope so. The humanity have the power to stop these plans. And for the speech of the ambassador of United States of America, he actually repeat the vision of Mr. Trump when he said a few months before he is elected as a president, that when he looking to the map, he sees that the Israelis border are very small, and he think how he can increase it. I hope so, Mr. Trump, when he going to become in power and live in the White House as a American president, he will change this statement and follow the rules and international laws and understand that the Palestinian territories are occupied territories. The Palestinian people have the right, according to international law, according to international resolution, to have their own state over their historical homeland, with Jerusalem as its capital, and they have the right of the Palestinian refugees to come back, to the right of return to their homeland, according to 194 resolution. We are optimistic that maybe Mr. Trump this time going to be different of Mr. Trump we see in 2017, when he giving a lot of gifts for the Israelis, and the first one turned his back for him after he lost the election in and Mr. Biden won the election, was the Israelis, not the Arabs, not the Muslims, not the Palestinians.
All right, but then Nader, now I'd like to also point you towards different reports that have come from the human rights organizations. We've been talking about that. I've talked about them with you as well in the past interviews that we've had, whether it be Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, or all the other important organizations, even the ICC, ICJ. They talk about genocide, they would talk about the war against crimes against humanity, and the war crimes that are being committed by Israel. A new report also reiterates the same thing by the Human Rights Watch of committing, accuses Israel of committing war crimes against the people of Palestine. Do reports like these have any impact whatsoever?
At least this gives evidence that the Israelis are doing genocide and making the Palestinians statement, the Arab countries' statement, the Muslim countries' statement, when they're supporting the statement of Palestinian people that they are suffering of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, that we are not telling lies like the Israelis, but actually we are sharing with the world the facts. Because with this respect and honorable institutes for human rights and international courts mention that this making for our statement, for our political position, strings that we are sharing facts. This making all the humanity around the world believe that the Israelis are the criminal, the Israelis are the terrorists, the Israelis who are breaking the international law, the Israelis who creating crimes against humanity, and the Palestinians only victim since long years, and they were suffering of Israeli propaganda, American propaganda, with supporting the occupation, supporting the settlements, supporting the apartheid, supporting the Israeli terrorist actions, supporting the occupation, and the time is need to become as soon as possible to make the Palestinians their rights, give them their rights which they deserve since long years, since decades, to get their own state with Jerusalem as its capital. We hope so. This kind of reports can be highlighted by all the international media to make the humanity know the facts after decades of lies by the American and Western media channels.
Thank you very much, Brother Nader. That was Nader Alturk, who is the Charge d'Affaires at the Palestinian Embassy in Islamabad, talking to us about the Israel-Palestine conflict, the Israel-Lebanon conflict that is escalating with each passing day. Thank you very much again, Brother Nader, to have joined us. Let's come to our second story, and that concerns the government that is tightening its grip as far as tax evaders or tax evasion is concerned. This has been highlighted in a recent interview that our finance minister, Mohammad Aurangzeb, gave. He talked about paying fair share of tax now compulsory. He said that we are going to assert the use of force for recovery. He says the paying of taxes is not a request, is something that which we have to do, and he talks about the recovery of taxes through compliance and enforcement. And he talks about the wholesalers, he talks about agriculture, real estate sectors that now will be included as far as that is concerned. We've been joined by Dr. Usman Chohan. He's a political economist and a leading economist in Pakistan in the studios to discuss more on that. Thank you very much, Usman, to have joined us. Usman, let's begin with the statement by Mr. Aurangzeb, who's our finance minister. He talks about paying fair share of tax that is now going to be compulsory. He asserts the use of force as well for recovery. These are two important points that I wanted to make with you and wanted your point of view on that. Then he says that the state has now made up its mind to recover these due taxes. He says this payment of tax is no longer a request as has been made in the past. It's something that we have to do. How do you view these comments? Do you feel that the assertion that our finance minister points to is easily implementable?
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. I endorse the sentiment expressed by the finance minister. I think this is a bold and powerful statement and signal to all stakeholders that enough is enough and that we have to all get on one page and everybody should be part of the program. I appreciate this boldness and I think it is the correct posture to have vis-a-vis tax evasion. That said, there are three provisos that will make this truly effective. One is that when you have taxation, you have to look at the other side of the equation, which is expenditure. And I think that having this strong tax policy is good in that context because now people will have expectations about service delivery and stuff. So rather than avoiding this question altogether, development is realized through both the balance between taxation and expenditure. The second is that a tax system has certain ideal principles, platonic principles you can call them, and those have to be implemented too. So a simpler tax system, a more efficient tax system, a clearer one that is more equitable, these are all also necessary. So tax reform will also have to come with that. But that said, again, the fact that this statement is made is the right statement at the right time. As we have come out of this IMF agreement, now implementing it, it's the best thing that could have happened.
All right. Our foreign finance minister rather says that these taxes are going to be recovered through compliance and enforcement. Again, enforcement is something we've discussed, compliance also. He says everybody, whether it is real estate, wholesale or agriculture, will have to contribute to the national economy. He says we are going to be very firm as far as compliance and enforcement is concerned. What methodology needs to be applied in order for this compliance to be forced, or this compliance to be, implemented in the right letter and spirit as highlighted by our finance minister?
It's a very pertinent question. When we look at the modus operandi, we often get into the technical stuff, but actually the missing ingredient has always been the political will. So you saw that tax impositions happened much earlier for the salaried class like us, and vested interests in these specific sectors that the finance minister names. I have no animus against them, but he specifically names them because they are highlighted in discussions with the IMF. And when you look at the system, these are particularly egregious evaders. So he says retailers and wholesalers is one, real estate is the second, and agriculture is the third. Because they're such egregious violators of this, or they're non-compliant by and large. That's not to say that they all are, but overall these sectors have the biggest lapses. They have to be given the most attention. So the modus operandi then goes into the technical aspects. You could have an efficient tax system with 20th century technology. Today there are tools, including those used by the FBR, including artificial intelligence and other things to spot various lacunas, missing things, mismatches between accounts. You can always see that something doesn't quite fit, and there's levels of technology to implement that, and then you proceed with that. But the thing with these sectors is that the evasion has been so broad-based that you actually have to have the political will to first target, and then technology comes second.
So what you mean to say is that the political will is paramount, and
Yes.
it's the first step in moving towards whatever our finance minister has been saying. Our finance minister also, as you pointed out, talks about the salaried class and the manufacturing sector that has been taxed again and again, and bears the most brunt as far as the tax is concerned. But when you talk of tax collection of taxes or tax contribution by all the different sectors, do you feel it is possible in the short term?
Yes, well, the targets that have been set have been very bold in the agreement with the IMF, and therefore that is why the IMF is engaging in extra oversight to make sure that work is being done. But the fact is that the way we have structured our tax system, it is very much reliant on the center and on the FBR. And deep down, I don't feel that that is equitable. It's not fair to the FBR to be able to deal with 25 crore people. In fact, there have to be layers of taxation, and the reforms that are being done do reflect that. So there's a national fiscal pact which puts more appropriate burden on the provinces. Then you can go further down into district level stuff. You can also look at the indirect taxation and how its patterns emerge among consumption. So if you have a more balanced architecture, it makes it easier to do the collection target stuff, and also makes it fairer for who you are taxing and for what purpose.
All right, Usman, also our finance minister talks about Pakistan's macroeconomic turnaround in just 14 months and compliments that, but also says that there is no longer any room for complacency, and that the nation needs to stay the course to build upon this nascent stability. How can Pakistan avoid complacency? We've done that in the past, been on the right track, and then we are sidetracked. How should we stay on track throughout in the next couple of years, or even next couple of decades?
I'm very glad that the finance minister said this, because this was my concern over the last few months, that as the global economy eases up in terms of inflation, and as Pakistan's economy reflects that, and things are getting significantly better over the last 3 months, will we then go back to the old patterns? That was my concern as well. But the reason that the finance minister is reiterating this is because if you don't do it this time, there are many reasons to worry that they may not be a next time in terms of assistance from outside, and that you would therefore have to do things now so that you create a more sustainable future. He understands that, the main stakeholders understand that, and that's why he has made references to things like the use of force. This is not a whimsical thing. This is a very serious and mature way to point out that the seriousness of the reform happening now is necessary, and simply just because the world is getting better doesn't mean that we don't have objectives to realize, and those objectives have to be realized without any sense of complacency just because things are getting better.
Usman also, he mentions his meetings. He's met with the Asian Development Bank today as well, but he's also met with the IMF. And he said that the IMF was happy, and it was talking about building of confidence and trust through better understanding. But he also talked about another thing apart from that. He said that our Prime Minister is going to shortly announce a homegrown economic roadmap devised after consultations with all stakeholders. Because you mentioned stakeholders, I just wanted to ask this question. What could such an economic roadmap that our Prime Minister is talking about, putting into consideration all the stakeholders, entail in your point of view, somebody who understands Pakistan's economy?
Yes, a very complex question, because it's not that all stakeholders can realistically be incorporated with an equal voice, but the idea is to prioritize the important ones that are most representative of our economic interest. So you do need inputs from the business community, you do need inputs from civil society, you do need to look at the federal and provincial bureaucracies, and that's where it will come from. I think that the idea of an indigenous economic strategy is necessary, and I want to revisit the successes that we had in the 1960s, because there was an indigenous thinking. That indigenous thinking began to evaporate in the late 80s and 90s as the donor class came in, foreign consultants took contracts to advise, and ultimately we haven't gotten very far with those because they cannot capture the internal perspective. First of all, because they don't understand the internal perspective. Second, because they draw lessons from other contexts which are not really relevant. And third, because we have to have our own indigenous base of thinking that has that conversation. And if you look at the last 24 programs that we've had with the IMF, at least 20 or at least 15 of them were not done with a good plan from our side or a concrete set of recommendations. Instead, there was a process of negotiation where the IMF was also scanning for areas to fix, and we were also scanning for areas to fix which didn't reflect an indigenous thing. Whenever a country presents an indigenous proposal, as Malaysia did after 1998, even in Manmohan Singh's time, much of the work was done that this is how we will do it. It makes the IMF's job easier. It also makes it easier to realize the targets. So when you have a national economic plan, and God forbid the world situation gets very bad economically and there is a need, you will at least have that thinking documented and cohesively put together to put to the IMF so that the next program will at least make sense, and hopefully there won't be a next program.
Well, let's see, that is what our Prime Minister has been talking about, that he wants that there's no future program with the IMF. Well, speaking of the IMF, our Finance Minister talks about the talks with the IMF that progress in a very conducive environment. He talks about reforms in taxation, energy and state-owned entities, privatization agenda, public finance. That was part of the discussion with the IMF. But he also talks about structural benchmarks that are required by the end of September that have been met. And the IMF was updated on the right sizing of the bureaucracy as well. Structural benchmarks, right sizing of the bureaucracy, is this something that we are going to also see in the coming future from Pakistan?
I hope so. I certainly hope so. This concept of right sizing is a euphemistic expression, but it means that if something is far too large, you have to bring it to a more appropriate size. In the sense of government, it is clear that relative to the public value it creates, the federal and provincial bureaucracies, and certainly provincial bureaucracy, are too large. So you have to right size them. Measures are being taken on that, but as you can anticipate, there is resistance at many different levels. So the work becomes hard, and that's why the IMF has revisited us so soon after the agreement to emphasize that we have not simply left you to do these things, we are keeping an eye, we hope for the best, and you have to follow the program. So this adds extra impetus to that. Otherwise, who knows, perhaps the amount of resistance presented domestically would slow things down, but this continued momentum is necessary on the right sizing stuff. In terms of the structural benchmarks, when you have a negotiation with an entity such as the IMF, much of it is of a technical nature where certain targets are highlighted that they believe have a structural impact, which is to say that once those structures are readjusted, you will see aftershocks throughout the economy, hopefully for the better. So you have monetary policy things, you have government spending, current account deficit, addressing it, fiscal account, all of these things are put together and said that you have to now go about doing this and you should expect these results. Now that's where we've had anticipation, although the finance minister has said that overall the negotiation has been, or the follow-up has been been very positive. The fact that the IMF comes just 6 weeks after is peculiar by global standards. So, you know, I think that the IMF might be a little bit too concerned given that things are getting better, and that's something that it's difficult to comment on.
All right, there's another thing, the finance minister talks about all the 4 chief ministers that are working diligently to comply with the conditionalities of the IMF. He talks about provincial taxes, other responsibilities. He talks about a whole of government approach of all, I mean, he includes all the provinces. Then he talks about indicators such as inflation that has reduced, policy rate that has also been reduced, the foreign exchange reserves that are now enough to cover 2.5 months of imports. How do you view these indicators and this whole of government approach? Do you feel this kind of an approach is needed or ideal for a country like Pakistan?
Yes, there is no other way, because over time, since 1947, our structures have become much more centralized, and that means that decision has happened in a very narrow corridor of expertise as well as interests, so it's not inclusive enough. That is why to increase the inclusivity you need inputs. It goes back to our previous point also about bringing in as many stakeholders as possible. Here you see that the federation and the provinces are of one mind, because everybody understands the gravity of the situation internationally as well as domestically in terms of sustainability of the economy. So it's very positive to see that there is no such resistance. But as you go down the layers of decision making, you do see vested interests come in. So when the top-down approach exists, you need to have everybody in the middle and at the bottom of this tree also being on the same page. And I think that the fact that the political will exists and there is simply no other way is a very positive sign, because things will actually happen.
Usman, we were just talking about the provincial governments. Let's talk about the Punjab government that has taken the lead to amend its agricultural income tax law. It has brought existing AIT rates for individuals and businesses at par with the federal income tax rates, and this bill has been passed by the Provincial Assembly. These changes also propose stringent and hefty penalties for defaulters. How important is this measure when, of course, our finance minister also talks about other sectors being included now in the tax net, and that strict compliance will be adhered to?
Absolutely. The fact that agriculture is such a significant part of our economy means that it has to be taken very seriously in terms of our overall fiscal architecture. I don't mean necessarily in terms of GDP, because in terms of GDP, agriculture has shrunk, not just because of yields, but because our service sector has grown. And manufacturing, despite its overtaxation, is still a component within that. But the fact that it is a big part of the labor force means that you can start to see meaningful changes once it is taxed in an appropriate manner. What are some of those important changes? The first, I believe, is that you can't have large sectors escaping from a strong punitive austerity system. We have a strong punitive austerity system now, and if you have agriculture slipping out, then manufacturing or the salaried class will have to bear the burden. So everybody has to be incorporated into that. That's the first thing, and that's good, because once things start to, when people start to feel the pinch, they start to look for who is avoiding that pinch the most, and so agriculture naturally had to come in. The second thing is, deep down, I believe that agriculture has two benefits from being put in a formalized tax system relative to all the other sectors. The first is that agricultural yields will increase because you will have an incentive to mechanize and do serious stuff, because there is a cost threshold to meet, which otherwise you are simply doing Stone Age agriculture and there's no incentive to improve that. And that's why you see that areas where there is a climate similar to our Punjab and similar soil, they have much higher yields than our Punjab does, and that's unfortunate because simply those incentives haven't existed. The second deeper advantage, I think, of this is that over the past 1,000 years in Eurasia as a whole, not just in Pakistan, the equation for population was driven by agriculture, in the sense that the more children you have, the larger labor pool you have. So it's simply better to have more children no matter what. And that equation still exists when you don't have formalization of structures. As the equation changes, where having more mouths to feed doesn't automatically translate into labor, it creates the impetus for technology and other mechanization that ultimately reduces population, because our population, yes, it's urbanizing, but the root of that urbanizing, the origin, is the countryside, and that's where the reforms have to take place.
All right. Now, some of the measures include ones employed by farmers with land holdings of less than 12.5 acres and absentee landholders are going to be exempted. And then unless their annual income is below the tax threshold of rupees 600,000. Then there are, there is the fact that the implementation of all these measures is going to only start from the next fiscal year. A lot of people are already talking about the different challenges that provincial governments are going to have as far as the agricultural income tax is concerned. They talk about FBR that have limited capacity to correctly assess farm incomes and collect tax accordingly. They talk about a large part of the agriculture market functions outside normal banking channels as well, and that transactions are conducted in cash, and that makes the the whole tax collection more difficult. Then the responsibility of farm income assessment and tax recovery that is also assigned to revenue officials like patwaris who are notorious for their corruption as well. Then the issue of smallholder farmers who hardly have taxable incomes. They fear that this is going to be used by the authorities from ruling parties to twist the arm of their opponents. So there's different angles to it, political and other maneuverings. How do you view these challenges? Do you feel the provincial government like Punjab can overcome this easily till the next fiscal year, or do you feel there will be hiccups?
There will be hiccups, and the proviso when I stated the advantages of taxing agriculture are that you have to address these problems too. Some of these elements can be dealt with simply technology. For example, space technology helps with this. So mapping from above how landholding and agriculture, inundation or dams or rivers, as well as yields, all of this, crop cycles, all of this can be done from above. And space technology already helps with that. AI also helps with that if you have reasonable data to see where the loopholes are. The other thing, so technology is one. Then there's the political will part. In Punjab, this is the Unionist Party logic for going back to pre-independence days, that large landholders have had this, but over generations, which means 3 generations, you've had a bifurcation, trifurcation, and further cuts of land as populations increase. So ultimately, you may need to adjust the thresholds of who is taxed and untaxed, and this speaks to principles of fairness in taxation. Because if you have too many small landholders and you're simply penalizing the large landholders, you're creating a distortion in the system. Taxation by its nature is distortionary because it adds an extra incentive. But if you add other provisos around it, then taxation can actually be a positive so long as other distortions compensate for this distortion, in the sense that if movements overall coalesce towards a larger goal, then it's all right to tax and it should be taxed, but you need to have everything else in place.
Now, speaking of economy and speaking of agriculture, how in your point of view can you bring about an increase in growth in important sectors of economy, including the agriculture, through increased production? What could be done in this regard in, say, the budget in 2025?
Well, there's many different perspectives on this, and some of those are ideological in nature. Some say that you have to bring in more market-driven mechanisms because there's too many distortions. Some say that government priorities, particularly at lower levels of government, are misaligned, and that you have a lot of agencies, but their own priorities don't align with the larger national interest, in the sense that they may have a specific agenda or a specific area of activity, and what they're doing in that doesn't align with that. So there's the bureaucracy element, there's the market element, then there's the overall economy element. So long as food prices worldwide are low, although we know in the last 2 years they've risen catastrophically, but so long as food price trajectory overall is low, the incentive to work on agriculture globally is also distorted. Similarly, there are innovations that are coming that make agriculture more or less mechanized, more sustainable or less sustainable. There's all of these moving parts that come into it, and so having a coherent policy for any sector is difficult insofar as so many moving parts exist. We've talked extensively about our energy policy, for example, how it's difficult to see how the energy markets or energy systems change in just a period of 30 years. So given the amount of transformation that's happening in the world, I'm sympathetic to the idea that you can't really plan too far ahead, but still you should be adaptive and dynamic enough to keep a present and near future reality in mind.
Okay, thank you very much, Usman Chohan, to have joined us. to have discussed economy, to have discussed the statements by the finance minister, and how important these are, and how important it is also to bring all the sectors under the tax net, because the more you bring every sector under the tax net, the more it burdens classes such as the manufacturing class or our class, that is the salaried class. I really hope this gets implemented sooner than later, and I really, because you know the way, if you broaden the tax net and if everybody complies, you know, we can all heave a sigh of relief and Pakistan's economy can move further in the right direction. So let's keep our fingers crossed as far as that is concerned. Kindly stay with us for another 2-3 minutes while I end the show. Third story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns Joe Biden and Xi Jinping. Now, both have agreed to have no control of artificial intelligence, that I was just talking to with Usman, over nuclear weapons. Xi Jinping says China is ready to work with the Trump administration for a smooth transition as far as bilateral ties between the two countries is concerned. We know the tensions that exist between both the countries, and I think China is wanting to lessen that tension one way or the other, and that is why this resolve to work with the Trump administration to smoothly for the smooth transition in bilateral ties between the US and China. Also the fact that they have said that there is going to be no use of AI, especially when it concerns nuclear arsenal or nuclear weapons, is also very important, because who knows, AI is still something in the making. We don't know how it could be misused maybe in one direction to another. So better to leave it in the traditional hands. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, coming to environmental pollution and the smog, we've seen the situation in Punjab, which is getting better and better with each passing day. Today was a much better day than it was in the last few days. But in New Delhi, unfortunately, the situation is no longer the same. The smog is still extremely dense and the visibility is less than 100 meters. They are talking about 1061 of AQI level in New Delhi. And the fact is that there are a lot of factors that contribute to what is happening in New Delhi as well, and whether it be the burning of the crops or the pollution by the cars and the other forms of vehicles and transport are adding to this situation. This is something that happens every year. I just wish that countries such as India and also Pakistan, that is also moving in the right direction with the measures that it is taking, will do the needful so that we don't see what we have seen this year, next year. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news stories segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.